here to observe only this evening. There is no ability to ask questions or to make any comment during the proceedings. So I'll now proceed with the main agenda items, which agenda item 1 is apologies for absence. I've received 2 of those. Councillor Robert Betley-Smith is being replaced by Councillor John Tagg, and Councillor Jill Burnett is being replaced by Councillor Simon White. Are there any other apologies or substitutions, please? That's a no. So are there any declarations of interest on items on the agenda, please? No, thank you. Moving on to item 3, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Depending on whether or not you have a printed version or a YouGov online version, the pages will differ slightly, but they are on pages 3 to 8 or 5 to 10, depending on which version you have. Can I take those minutes as read, or does anybody have any alterations suggested to them? Okay, I see that as affirmative, so they will be taken as read. Thank you. Item 4 is an update from Cabinet. So I'll ask Councillor Sweeney if there's any update to give, please.
No, I wasn't asked for any apart from one, which was the bid manager, Alex, was asking for support to prepare sort of financial bids for things. But unfortunately, of course, Alex has now left.
Right.
So he passed over to Simon now and tell you what we're going to do about that.
Thank you. We've got a new bid manager who started at the beginning of this month. The previous manager, Alex, left quite quickly. So we're now talking to the new bid manager about what level of support she needs and how we'll help her with her bid writing and marketing. So it's on our agenda to work out those details through with her. Okay, thank you. No further update? No. So we'll move on to the first substantive item, which is HS2. We asked HS2 to come along this evening basically to give us an overview as to what is likely to be happening in our borough over the next 12 months. And we've got the Senior Engagement Manager here, Victoria Roberts. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Victoria, and take us through the presentation. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much. If we could get the slides shared, that would be great. But while that's happening, just to introduce myself. So I'm Victoria, the Senior Community Engagement Manager for Phase 2A, which is a section of the route that starts just north of Fradley and then up into Crewe. So there's a team of about 6 of us at HS2 who manage engagement in this area. And then we also have the engagement teams of the contractors who will be coming out and talking to communities and stakeholders about specific activity that they're doing on behalf of us. So today I was just going to go through a bit of a background of HS2, just so everybody in the room, I'm not sure on the level of sort of understanding and awareness of the programme as a whole, and then go into a bit more detail about what's happening in the borough, what work will be happening that may communities may see, may feel, as well as then looking at some of the opportunities that there might be as a result of HS2 for people and businesses in the borough as well. So just to start, why do we need HS2? The sort of key driver behind it is what we call the 3 Cs. So capacity, carbon and connectivity. So it's about looking at ways that we can increase the capacity on the existing network. It's very full. So HS2 provides that opportunity to create more space on the existing rail by moving the longer journeys and passenger services onto the new rail. And that should open up and improve services for commuter services, so local train services, as well as freight and taking some of those lorries off the road as well, which leads nicely into the carbon side of it. So as well as train travel being much cleaner than long distance and sort of domestic flights and long distance car journeys, HS2 provides that opportunity to improve those local services, get more people off the roads, out of cars and onto the train. And in terms of that building element of HS2, the environment is a key part of our planning, the mitigation. We have a commitment around no net loss of biodiversity, and also looking at ways and looking at innovation within our supply chain of how we can build the infrastructure in the least impactful way, using the least carbon emissions. So looking at new innovations to do that. And then the final one is around that better connectivity. So joining up key sort of regions across the region. So looking at Manchester, Leeds, the West Midlands, and obviously London as well. So that's sort of the why. So moving to the next slide, I just wanted to start with an overall picture of the journey of where we are. So overall, phase 1 of HS2 is the main part that is well underway. So that has been underway for a number of years. That's the section between London and Birmingham. So the main construction work's happening there. They're building the bridges, they're well underground, digging the tunnels. And so that work and the disruption and what the visible work is really quite clear for communities in those areas. And then phase 2A, which is this area, we got accelerated as part of that process to open and align to the opening of phase 1. But in terms of construction activity, we're just starting to ramp that up now. So we're just starting with the preparatory work in the area. So preparing for that main work construction that will happen in a few years' time. And I'll touch on that in a bit more detail later. And then finally, there's the phase 2B section. So there's the phase 2 western section, which is from Crewe to Manchester. So the bill for that was deposited to Parliament in January, and that's now going through that process, parliamentary process, hoping to have a second reading soon. And that will be a number of years before we then get parliamentary approval, hopefully, for that section, and we can then start to build phase 2B up to Manchester. And then the area, I'm sure some of you may have seen it in the news, in terms of to the eastern leg of phase 2B, which is the Leeds region. We've been asked by the government to pause and look at that as the wider part, as a part of a wider integrated rail plan. And we're still waiting for instruction from the government as what they would like us to do in that space and what services and how that what that looks like for HS2. So that's still awaiting that decision. So that's the HS2 in general and a bit of context. So now just looking more closely at phase 2A. So on the slide, you can see this is just some really interesting and key sort of headline stats. So whilst phase 2A, it's a 36-mile section of route. Within that 36 miles, we've got 26 cuttings, we've got 17 viaducts, 65 bridges, 2 tunnels. So in no way a small feat of engineering and works that will be taking place across the area, which means that we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that we do that in the right way, that we're building in the right way, as well as using the best technology that we've got to build it as well. So that just gives an indication, and on the map on the side, you can sort of see a very high level view of the route in general coming through the Staffordshire area. So if we move to the next slide, this shows you the journey of building that section of the route. So as I've already touched on, we've gone through the parliamentary process that started back in 2016, where we had a number of public consultations, and that culminated in us getting royal assent in February 2021. So the all go to start building the railway. So since we've had that, the focus has been on a lot of surveys works to inform the design. So we've got a general scheme design that's been approved, but now the focus is very much on developing that design further, using some of the information we'll get from surveys. So making sure that we're using the right technology, making sure we understand what's in the area. So making sure that we're then protecting any sort of habitats or species that might be in the areas that we'll be working in. And that preparatory work now, informing that, is also starting. As well as that design, development and surveys, there's also preparatory work that will be taking place, particularly around the road network. So that's been put in place and will be starting to be constructed over the next sort of, well, mid-2023 onwards. And that's around making sure that the local road networks that we will have to use are in the right condition and have the right facilities to allow us to use those safely and with as least disruption to sort of local traffic flows and communities as we can do. And then once that's happened, it then moves on to the sort of finalising of the designs, and that will be around 2024 to 2025. So that's where the main works contractors, once they're awarded, will take the designs that we've developed to a certain level, and those main works contractors will be going through the specifics. So that's very much looking at, okay, we know the bridge, we know the dimensions of the bridge, but can we, how are we going to build it, and how can we build it in a way that is more environmentally friendly, less disruptive to community? So it's around the techniques, as well as going through the final sort of approvals and consents that we need to build some of these structures and carry out some of this work. And then the actual main works construction. So again, what's happening on phase 1 at the moment, building the bridges, building the tunnels, will start from around 2025 onwards, with the view of the railway in this area sort of up and operating from 2031 to 2033. So that gives a timeline. So as you can see, there's lots of different steps happening, and that will be happening. And my job and the engagement team's job is to work with communities and stakeholders such as yourself to make sure everybody understands what's happening. We're answering any questions and also involving people in that process as much as we can do. So on to the next slide, I was just going to touch on the preparatory works a bit more. So this looks at some of the specific work that's happening at the moment. So we have been carrying out a lot of ground investigations. So these are quite low key from a visibility and impact point of view. They're very much sort of on local landowners. People driving past, if it's near a road, might see sort of a rig that might be drilling down into a field. But in terms of wider impacts, there's very little sort of to see. And those investigations have now come to a close. So that package of work is sort of finalising. There's a few sites that are still open, and we're just monitoring for the results in those areas. So that work shouldn't be sort of that visible to you in this area. The next one is around utility diversions. So the utility companies are starting to look at the surveys and the activity, as well as starting the actual diversions of utilities that we need to move in order to build the railway. So they'll be undertaking that work themselves. So there is a couple in this area, which I'll show in due course, that will be happening. But again, in terms of disruption and impact, it's quite localized. It's just where they're setting up the site that there might be some temporary impacts, such as traffic lights on a road while they move things around until they're happy and everything's safe for those roads to be sort of open as usual. And then the early environmental work, so that's quite a big package of work, and there's around 11 early environmental sites in the borough. So those are sites where we are establishing new habitats and locations for species that will be moving into those habitats when it comes to sort of the main work. So the idea is that we're planting these new habitats to offset some of the areas that we are having to go through, and those habitats will have time to mature and develop. So when we get to the construction work, we're able to then translocate any sort of species into those new and established habitats, so such as newts, for example. And so that work is ongoing at the moment at various sites. So some sites have been possessed and fenced off, and we're also now starting the actual planting. And so that could be planting of trees, planting of grasslands, and also there's some ponds. So as the contractor who delivers that work likes to call it, it's like gardening on a grand scale in those areas. So there is some visibility of that activity. And because of some of the activity, we do need to put some temporary traffic lights near to the site entrances when they're doing something particular, because of the vehicles that they need to get into the site, and that's where people see. So I know in Baldwin's Gate, for instance, they've had some traffic lights just on the sort of, as you come out of the village towards Newcastle, there's been some traffic lights on and off to allow them to work on that site there, which they've been doing some sort of archaeological trial trenches there before they start to do some of the planting and mitigation works in that area. Then the early civils work. So this touches on what I mentioned earlier, which is the road modifications. So there's around 20 sites across the whole of phase 2A where we're adapting the local road network. So that might be widening a road temporarily. It could be putting in passing bays. It could be modifying a junction, whether that's widening a junction or putting in a roundabout. And that's all about making sure that where we have identified construction traffic routes, that those roads are suitable to support that activity and safe for both the drivers and also the people who are using and walking near those roads. So that activity is happening across the region. There is a couple of sites, in particular one major site for this area, which is the Hanchurch Junction. So I will touch on that in a little bit more detail shortly. And that work is going through the design development process. So there's been the surveys that inform that design going on. The contractors are now working with the planning authority to get approvals for those designs. And once that's happened, those designs will be shared with the communities so people understand what's happening and when that will happen. And that work will start sort of mid-2023 onwards in terms of the construction on the road. But Hanchurch is looking to be slightly earlier than that into the sort of start of next year. And then the advanced civil works, which is the last and final bit of preparatory work, that's going to start in mid-2023. And that's where you'll see sites being set up. So the bigger construction sites, clearing the land, taking possession of the land that we need, and then securing that land, and then also setting up the access routes to those lands, so the link onto the road network, as well as creating haul roads. There's around 60 kilometres of haul road that will be producing or creating across 2A, and by haul roads, that's roads that will create temporarily along the trace of the railway. And a key part of that is to move the construction traffic off the roads where we can, and they use those roads to go from site to site up and down the railway. So that gives an overview of all the things that are happening, and I know I'm going through quite a lot, so I'm happy to sort of answer as many questions or follow up with anybody after this. But on this map, this shows sort of the region, and you'll see the different sites that I've mentioned. So we've got the early environmental work sites, the utility diversion, one of which is near Baldwin's Gate, and the 2 or 3 highways modification sites in this borough there as well. So we've just moved on to the next slide. So I've just highlighted here some of the sites that are in this borough and what is being done in terms of environmental mitigation. So as you can see, it's a mixture of hedgerow, planting, woodlands, grassland, ponds, and those sorts of things. And as I said, that work's going to be carrying out over the next year at different phases as they get access to that land and start that construction activity. And as well, the sort of planting and the work that they do obviously has a link to the season, so they can only do certain things at certain times of the year based on sort of wildlife and when you would plant things like that. As we move to the next slide. So on here, I've just highlighted the utilities and what's happening there. So the 2 utility locations are all related to the power that we will need to supply sort of the Whitmore tunnelling area and the diversions of the power sites there. So that work is underway, and there's quite a lot of activity on those sites at the moment. And then we've also got Blackbrook Junction, which is the A53, A51. And for those that are from that area, I know that it is quite a tricky junction as it is. Which is why we're working very closely with the sort of highways authority there, and we've been out on site visits to look at how we can improve that junction within the sort of limits that we have and powers that we have with the land taken under the HS2 Act. So again, that design's still ongoing and being progressed. But then Hanchurch Junction, which is the one I was going to touch on a little bit more, is a little bit more progressed, and there's a little bit more activity that we can share on that. So if we move to the next slide. So yeah, in terms of Hanchurch Junction, we're proposing to change that to make sure that it can manage the traffic flows that will be coming through that area, sort of from the M6 and onto the sort of A500 and A51. So you can see the improvements that have been set out on the slide, but that's around upgrading the roundabout to improve the flow, introducing a dual carriageway into Newcastle. And that's including a service road for the residents along that road, and also a pedestrian crossing for those that live in that area over the A500. So that will be a footbridge, as well as an update to the signalised junction between Newcastle and Trentham. So those designs are still sort of being discussed with the community. So we have what's called an undertaking and assurance with some of the residents along that road. So we've been out and shared some of the designs around safety with those residents, and we've had their feedback on that. And that's something that's been taken away now by the sort of designers, and they're looking into any sort of issues or concerns that have been raised and making sure that they're accounted for as we develop those designs. So if we go to the next slide. There's a lot of writing on this slide, but this is just an overview of the footbridge particularly, but it's basically going to span the whole of the carriageway. So it will have access for wheelchair users as well as pedestrians, and it will be sort of constructed at the end of 2023. So it will be in place and ready to use before we see any impact in terms of the traffic flows that will be using that road. Obviously, because we want to make sure that's all there for people to use and ensure that they can safely cross what is already quite a busy road. So again, that's all still going through the consents process and with Staffs County Council. If we go to the next slide. So as part of doing that work, and you'll already potentially, if you use that junction, seen some of this activity happening, we have been doing some surveys. So there's been some temporary traffic lights and closures, but we'll also be removing some of the vegetation. So where the Eddie Stobart sort of depot is, there's quite a lot of screening there that we'll have to remove to sort of do that widening work, but we will be replanting the screen sort of vegetation in that area once that work has been completed, and it will be replaced as soon as we are able to do so. And we'll also be putting up a noise fence barrier for along that road. So if we just move to the next slide. Yeah, so again, that will be what that will look like, and the size of that will be determined based on sort of the designs, but that will be all based on sort of the noise modelling that will be taking place in the area. So I think in summary, that area and that junction, I know that's quite a busy junction, and there will be a lot of activity taking place there over the next sort of year or so, particularly as we move into 2023. So that will lead to some disruption for road users, and we'll always make sure people know in advance of what work's happening and when, and we work very closely with all the residents on that road in terms of disruption and minimising any noise and the works taking place during sort of agreed hours and things like that. So if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to finish looking at some of the sort of opportunities and sort of engagement activity that we do in this borough. So if we move to the next one, just as a sort of high level in terms of services that the region's going to get. So HS2 itself will be travelling along the high-speed track, and that will go up past sort of this area and continue on to sort of Manchester area. But what we will have is the Handsacre link. So that's where just at Handsacre, just north of Lichfield, the high-speed trains will come off the high-speed track and they'll go along the existing rail, and which means that we'll be able to service Stafford, Stoke and Macclesfield stations as well. So there should be improvements in services and connections for those using those stations in the area as a result of HS2. So in terms of the service pattern and those sorts of things, they'll all come down further along the line, depending on who's sort of responsible for operating the trains. So if we move to the next slide, I wanted to touch on the community and business funds that we do have available. So there's £5 million available to communities and businesses that are disrupted as a result of HS2 activity. So these funds are completely independently managed by the charity Groundwork, and the applications for this opened in April 2021. And there's loads of information on the Groundwork site, and they have lots of advisors who will advise people people on the application process and support them through that. There's around, depending on the scale of the project, you can go for a local one, which is a more focused project that might be supporting the refurbishment of a local village hall, for instance, or improving the facilities for a community in a local park, versus a more strategic one, which would look at a broader area of communities that would benefit and people that would benefit from that project. So those sorts of projects, as I said, they can be things like refurbishing a village hall. They could be sports facilities, so sports clubs and things who are looking to improve their facilities to bring in new members and to be able to provide another service for local people. It could be a children's play area. So there's lots of different things that people can apply for. The key is just making sure that they demonstrate that the community that they're benefiting through that project are those that will feel some of the disruption from HS2. So, and that could be traffic implications near their area, as well as the actual works of the railway itself. And then we look at the business funds. So that's slightly different. So when we say business funds, it's not for individual businesses to claim compensation for any impacts they are personally feeling. It's aimed at business groups and organisations. So the Chambers of Commerce, the LEP, we work very closely with them already. And it's about how we can bring benefits to businesses in some of the disrupted areas. So they could be projects of upskilling businesses, and it could, or projects to help them manage the disruption in a different way, or help promote them. So they've done sort of in other areas, ways, you know, tourist activity, local cards for business groups, so people can sign up to those cards and then you get a discount, those sorts of things. So there's lots of opportunities in that area.
We are on time, Victoria. Have you got much more to go?
No, just a couple more slides.
Okay.
So I will move on to the next slide. These are just a couple of examples on there, but I can share more if anybody's particularly interested in the funds for their area. So if we move to the next slide. And again, there is also the Biodiversity Investment Fund. So this is something that was delivered. It's £2 million that's available. And as I mentioned at the start, we have a commitment already of no net loss biodiversity. This isn't linked to that commitment. This is something to go above and beyond the work that we're committed to doing. It's more aimed at sort of organisations that work in this space, and that could be creating extra areas of sort of habitat or wetland areas, those sorts of things that can help really improve the biodiversity or sort of the habitats and environment in this area. So again, that's quite a technical one for businesses who sort of work in that area, but I can share more information with anybody who's interested in that. We move to the next slide. So business opportunities. So with a construction organisation of this size, we've got lots of things that we need to build, and with that comes lots of things that we will need. And I think the key point here is it's not just things that you would traditionally associate with building in terms of construction organisations. It's very much smaller businesses that can help support those businesses, from stationery providers to accommodation providers. There's lots of different scales you can get involved, from the formal contract and procurement world right down to worker choice. We have a local business team who work in promoting the offer of local business groups. So we do a lot with the Chamber and the LEP in that space on helping businesses understand the different ways that they can get involved. And we're already seeing some really good examples of that. So there's a couple of examples. Some of the pictures on here are small businesses that have done that. And I'll particularly draw out Kai and his team on the top left as a great example of a really small accommodation provider near one of the sites in phase 1. They saw an opportunity and they've massively grown their business in providing accommodation for the workers in the area. And they've sort of seen their business grow massively. And at the moment they house about 80 workers. And at the start they had about 16 in total that they could house. So that's happened over the last couple of years. So there's a real opportunity for different businesses in the area if they want to grasp that. And I think that's something that we really want to make sure we're capturing in this area to make sure that the local businesses benefit from HS2, not just those sort of more nationally. And then on the last slide, I think I'm at, opportunities for people. So this is around sort of the skills and employment opportunities. Building a railway, we need lots of people to do that, and that's particularly in our supply chain. So there's apprenticeship opportunities, there's opportunities for skilled workers who are looking for the next thing. We're needing about 34,000 people to build the railway in total, but for phase 2A alone, it's expected to need around 6,000 to support the project. And that's all sorts of, jobs from ecologists to engineers themselves to work to plant machine operators. And as part of that, we have a skills team who work closely with various organisations, including the council, around sort of making sure that we identify and reach the local audience and the local people, and bring people in and upskill people to be able to deliver this railway, because there is a skills shortage. And I think I've got one more slide potentially.
You have to be really quick, please, because we are
that's just around the channels that we keep people informed. So around newsletters, and if anybody's got any questions on that, I can talk through that separately. And that's everything. So any questions?
Thank you. Just for a handover to members, just two things. And one of them actually naturally follows on from that last slide that you've just put. It's informing communities. One of my big concerns representing a ward that is impacted by HS2 is that I think people have grown lethargic of it. It was announced 9 years ago. They haven't really seen much happen. And so, how much disruption is really going to hit our communities over the next 5 to 7 years, which is going to be substantial in its nature. And it's really how you engage with the communities. And really, when that is going to happen, when the detailed planning work is out the way, and appreciate until that is finished, you don't know exactly how it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But at that point, how are you going to engage with the communities, both individual landowners and the villages, the communities concerned, so that they know what's going to be coming up, how much infrastructure is going to be involved, and what it means for them really locally?
Yeah, so as you say, we're going out and about in communities already. We're holding sort of regular meetings that people can book onto, both in the virtual and face-to-face world. So we're giving people that option. But as you say, at the moment, other than the sort of the smaller scale activity that we make sure people in the area are aware of through sort of advanced work notices that have to go out at least 14 days before any activity, we will be holding more information events where we'll share the designs, and that will be through the contractors who will be delivering that work and their engagement teams with the support of HS2, so me and my team. And those activities will be sort of have more information to share around the actual specifics of programme of work, timelines around that broader construction. So we'll be looking at different channels to do that, and what works for different communities, because different communities have different demographics, different likes and different areas have sort of different catchments. So we'll make sure that we're sort of reaching out into the different communities in the right way, and giving people different channels to engage with us, both through the sort of digital world, but also very much giving them the opportunity to come and talk to us face to face. And we'll go out to the communities rather than expect them to come to us.
Thank you. And I think that is absolutely critical.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you could update us on that as we get closer to it.
Yes, yeah.
And then the second question was with regards to utilities, which you've already shortly mentioned, but two major concerns for Whitmore and for Madeley are the two tunnels.
Yes.
And we are told that they require 11,000 volt cables to be run to actually power the tunnelling machines. And the routing of those cables could be very disruptive. And I know certainly in local engagement, we've asked for them to be routed outside of any major conurbation. And I don't know if you've got any update on that.
I don't have any details on that, but I can take that one away and come back to you on that one. No problem.
Okay, if you could, please.
Yes, yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely.
Right, over to members' questions. Councillor Beeston.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I have a question. I've been protest. I was quite disturbed to see people clad in black with their faces hidden, glasses on, no badges identifying who they were.
Sorry, your mic's gone off.
Sorry, do you want me to start again?
Yeah, for the recording, it needs to be on. No.
you take yours off as well.
Right, is it on now? Sorry. Yeah, I've been watching some footage on the television of protesters, and you appear to have some sort of security guards who are dressed in black with their faces covered, sunglasses on, no badges. I just wonder what the status of these people were and what powers they've got and what their the legal standing of them is.
Yeah, absolutely. So the people that you see in black, they're part of the national enforcement team. So they're provided as part of that sort of high court injunction process, and they're provided through the court. And then we also have additional HS2 security who's supporting them. So there was quite a big security presence, as you would have seen if you were driving past there for a number of weeks, largely because it is quite a large area that we needed to secure. But as the protesters have moved away, we've been able to secure those areas with more sort of permanent fencing, and those numbers have dropped down. But there's always someone on site from HS2 who's there to make sure anybody who is walking past and has got any questions or concerns, they can sort of take those away.
But what are the powers of those people? I mean, you can't identify their faces, or they're not wearing name badges. So if they actually did something that they shouldn't be, you wouldn't actually know who they were. And what are their powers with regard to the protesters?
So they don't have any sort of physical powers to sort of remove, but we've had police on site supporting the activity as well. So in terms of any sort of concerns about activity, then we will, people can sort of report that straight away and it's investigated. There's cameras and footage taken so that we've got recordings of anything.
Appreciate it's difficult to identify them though if they don't have a badge and you can't see their face.
In terms of each individual, absolutely, I understand that. I think in part that's because of their own security and being able to then leave the site and move around safely in the area without them being identified themselves by sort of protesters in the area. But in terms of who we know who's on site and we know who's working in the area.
Thank you.
Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. You might have to bear with me with the microphone. Very, very simple question, very straightforward question. In your presentation, you very much emphasised the opportunities for local businesses and for apprenticeships and training. Does that therefore mean that in the construction of the stretch through North Staffordshire companies are going to be favoured in the sort of bidding mechanism for contracts?
In short, no, it has to be an open and fair procurement process. We have to make sure that we're getting the best deal for the taxpayer and we're also getting the best quality product. But what I would say is we have, and we can work closely with the chambers to give those businesses all the information they need to give them the best chance of being competitive and going through for those opportunities. So it's an open market, so anyone can go for those jobs. But there's also an inherent benefit for those working with those businesses. So things like apprenticeships and numbers, things like the distance travel from site, so the carbon footprint associated with that, and all those sorts of things are things that local businesses have as a benefit, and that's accounted for as part of that project, which larger businesses or businesses further away would have to sort of offset in a different way. So there's a balancing scorecard. So just being local won't give them that extra, without any sort of looking at the details and being able to demonstrate, we're local, so we've got a lower carbon footprint because we don't have to travel and those sorts of things. So you have to look at it in that way. But it is a very sort of open process because it has to be to make sure it's fair.
Councillor Moffat.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I'm a bit concerned. It all sounded really great and the slides were all very good and it all seemed to make perfect sense. But actually, I'm not an expert, but I know that across the country and certainly locally, it doesn't make that much sense. For instance, there seems to be this idea that you can replace ancient woodland with some new plants. You use words like vegetation. And when I think of vegetation, I think about going down to the allotment or, growing a few things. But actually, when you are talking about vegetation, you're talking about ancient trees that have had a life of their own and existed and got their own stories to tell. And the creatures, and you talk about biodiversity, and you're talking about it as if it's a direct exchange for one thing and another, and it really genuinely isn't. I'm also aware that there's been some, and I'm a great believer in the knowledge of communities. So I know that there are people in Stone and in Baldwin's Gate who have spent huge amounts of time engaging with the government, with the House of Lords, putting forward alternative plans which just seem to be being batted back at them. Plans which would protect things like the biodiversity of the area and actually make really logical sense in terms of the use of sidings that already exist in various places like a Keel, causing less disruption around things like Hanford and what have you. So my problem, I suppose, in terms of being in a scrutiny meeting is that the stuff that I get to know from engaging with local people doesn't match up with the stuff that's being presented. The other issue that I know this directly because I've been approached, you talk about community engagement, but I know for sure, certainly of one person who tried to engage with the presentation and was prevented from going in. And even when that person asked the police, why can't I come into this? The police actually said, well, I'm not entirely sure, really. So there are a number of kind of concerns that I have, including things like one of my colleagues here mentioned the anonymity of some people who are working for HS2 versus the voice of the community and not knowing who those people are. So I genuinely have some concerns. And I suppose my last comment is we would love to see connectivity as being a really big part of Newcastle and the way it engages with the outside world. We've got an amazing university on our doorstep. We've got Manchester and Birmingham airports locally. But actually we could make connectivity work much better, perhaps through an alternative to HS2, because a few minutes that are saved on these super fast lines, so all of the investment, the money that's being used could be used differently. And I'm just wondering, is there a chance to make HS2 work for us rather than it being the HS2 programme? Is there a way of diverting some of that ambition, including jobs, connectivity, reimagining the railways locally? Or is it all just a done deal that we don't have any opportunity to impact on? And I'm sorry that there's a lot of things there. I know that our community members will be watching, and our job as local councillors and members is to make sure that we're reflecting some of the concerns that have been brought to us. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Forgive me if I don't come back on some of those points. Just nudge me if I've forgotten one of them. I've noted them down as you said. I think in terms of the sort of biodiversity angle and the sort of ancient woodlands, we recognise that you can't replace by definition, an ancient woodland. You can't replace it with a new one because it's no longer ancient. But what we do is make sure that we sort of translocate a lot of the sort of benefit and history of those ancient woodlands are in sort of the soil. So that is all translocated off the sites onto the new sites. And we have, where we can, minimised any sort of takedown of ancient woodlands. So it is a very small amount of sort of some of the woodlands that we are impacting. It is a small amount, and I'll look at the figures and follow up and share those afterwards because I don't know them, I'm afraid, off the top of my head. But we do work hard to try and avoid that. And we work very closely with, I know you mentioned sort of the engagement and that ability to feed into those designs and what we've done. So that, at the early stages, we had the formal consultations, but now we're in that stage where we've got the basic plan, but we will still be engaging, and we've got teams that work very closely with the landowners. So we'll get their insight and their knowledge of sort of what will work for them and sort of their business, and making sure that we're minimising the impacts to them, but also using their local knowledge to say, well, actually, we can, if we do it slightly differently here, it will have a less of an impact and more benefit for the people. So they are discussions that we have with local people and local landowners as we're sort of developing and delivering those works. I'd also say, as we go through those finalised designs, whilst we've got the scheme plan and the overall, a key part of what they're doing as part of that design development is reducing the impact. So where we can, we've got the sort of the land take that we can have, the things that we can do, but what we're working on is saying, well, do we need all that land? Actually, we might be able to reduce the take there. We might be able to reduce the impacts here. We might be able to save some areas here. So that is all part of that detailed design process, and hearing and feeding that back to us as the community. That then does get fed back to those teams who are delivering that work, and they'll look at that as part of that engineering sort of process to see if it is sort of feasible. It's got to be that balance between feasibility, cost for the taxpayer, as well as impacts, but it is all sort of taken on board and fed into, and that's one of the key things that we do as engagement. It's disappointing to hear that someone was not allowed into a presentation. That shouldn't. All our sort of events are public, except the ones that we have been doing more recently are one-to-one appointments. So if someone was in an appointment, so they book that appointment, they get one-on-one time with us to talk about their particular concerns. If there was an appointment ongoing, they would have had to wait for that appointment. And if we were fully booked, it may be that they didn't have the sort of time to do that.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to take, there's 2 remaining questions and then we're going to have to move on because we are running late. Councillor Panther, please.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to your groundwork charity, you mentioned £5 million. It's an annual amount, and the organisation claiming it have to be directly affected by the works of HS2.
So it's £5 million in total, and then each project you can either go for a local one, which is up to 75,000, or the strategic one, which I think was 100 and something thousand. So they're the bigger, or 250 potentially.
Well, you mentioned that Village Hall, and I know a Village Hall close to the line could deal with it.
Yes, so as part of the management of the fund's groundwork, we'll look at what other sort of awards have been made. They'll make sure that that's sort of spread out evenly across communities, so not one community is getting lots of funds. It will be sort of managed, and they're responsible for doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question, Councillor Sweeney.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Couple of things, different areas. You talk about dualling the Clayton Road, which is the road from the Junction 15 roundabout up to Newcastle. How are you going to do that? Is that going to be 2 lanes each side, or because it's only 3-lane road at the moment? So how are you going to do that? Also, I think you mentioned about being 40 mile, bring it down to 40. Is that 40 mile an hour limit now? Although it never gets obeyed, but it's a 40 mile an hour limit as it is. But how do you intend to dual carriageway that?
Do you mean the bit coming up into Newcastle
Coming up the
down?
hill. Yeah, you come off the roundabout at the A500 and you go up a hill, don't you?
Yes, yeah, I'm with you.
Which also leads to, can you send us those slides out? Because it'll be interesting to see these on the better, because I'm looking at that, I can hardly read it. So it'd be better read on my computer to see the plans. But yeah, you're gonna dual it, I think you said. Presumably to the first roundabout.
Yeah, let me just double check. So on the other side, we're putting in an extra lane there. But
on the other side?
Yes, on the sort of side coming down from sort of Eddystone down.
Yes, okay, yeah.
So we're definitely putting in a lane.
This is a huge pinch point this is going to be, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, tells about 1,500 extra lorries and things like that on this junction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's why we're very conscious of making sure we get the design right. That's why we're sort of working closely with communities at the moment to do that. But I'm not sure. I don't think we are inputting another lane on that side. But those
I misunderstood you then. I thought you said you're going to dual it on the Newcastle side.
It's an upgrade to the Newcastle Trenton Road with a signalised junction is what I've got here.
Newcastle Trenton. Well, yeah, if you
So
send us things, I'll have a shufty at it. Because fine. The next thing is the Swan with 2 necks, which is the Blackbrook Junction.
Yes,
which is a bit of a pig of a junction. What sort of things are you looking at there?
So I know we've had questions around try, could we put a roundabout there
Yeah.
to improve that round? But in terms of looking at the designs and things there, that doesn't look feasible from the land take we've got and safety point of view, particularly because there's that corner coming in, isn't there, on the A51?
It's a VAR junction.
Yeah, exactly. And we're aware of that. So at the moment, one of the things we are looking at is as a signalised junction and signalising that junction. That's looking to be the direction that we will take. But again, that's still got to go through all the approvals process and the finalising of the design. But once we've got an idea of what we're proposing, that will be sort of shared more widely by the contractor engagement teams to give people that opportunity to feed in and raise anything that they may have missed in terms of concerns.
Okay, thanks so much, Sean.
Thank you. So just to wrap up, thank you for the presentation and answering the questions this evening. We will obviously ask you to come back before us as soon as there's anything more substantive in which you can update us and we can question again. There were some unanswered questions there that I'm hoping the clerk has taken a note of, so that you can come back and answer those for us, and they will be distributed amongst the committee and made public. And also the presentation, if you could send us that and we'll again circulate it. Are we okay to put that on our public website?
Yeah, absolutely. The slides themselves are all fine, and as you said, I'll follow up with some of the questions in a bit more detail of what's been raised today, so you've got that to share as well.
That's fine. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, so we move now on to item 6, which is policing presence in Newcastle under Lyme town centre, and we've got Sergeant Stephen Windridge with us this evening. We asked for this to come before us because at the last meeting we had a presentation from the BID, and part of the issues and concerns that they were raising was that footfall was being compromised because of issues within the town centre, and there was concern raised over lack of police presence, not so much on the night time and the nighttime activity, but more so on the daytime and weekends. So if you could update us on that and if there are any changes proposed. But also at the same time, we know that towards the end of this month, there's a new police model coming out within the borough. If you could just give us a brief overview of that as well, please.
Is it working? Good evening, councillors, and to the panel. Yeah, so I'm Steve Windridge. I'm a neighbourhood sergeant based here at Newcastle. And in terms of the policing around the town centre, it has been acknowledged that year on year there's been an increase in number of incidents, crime related and antisocial behaviour. Not wanting to use it as an excuse, but 12 months ago there would have been COVID restrictions, so naturally we have expected to see that increase. When we start looking back towards when pre-COVID times, it's on a little bit more of a similar level to what we were experiencing at that point. Policing as it is at the moment, from Newcastle, we've got neighbourhood teams based here. So there's 3 shifts that will cover from 8 until midnight generally. And then when we do the safer nights on a Friday, Saturday, that runs through till 3 o'clock in the morning. There are 4 PCs, and there's 2 on my shift, and then there's 1 on the other 2 shifts that are dedicated to the town centre. And then each shift will have a dedicated PCSO as well. The PCSO and the PC, they will have access to the PABSIS radio system. So it's something that the local businesses can subscribe to, and they can get access to a town centre radio. It's a really good, quick way of communicating with the police if there is incidents in the town centre, and we can quickly respond to it. One of the advantages of being based at Castle House with the local council as well is that we have a really good partnership working relationship with the antisocial behaviour team, the rough sleeping team. The majority of the issues that are being reported to us during the daytime are to do with vagrancy and homelessness. As part of the patrol strategy, we do try to get out with the rough sleeping team when they do their early morning walk around and identify who has been on the streets overnight. And the PCSOs, the expectation is that they will be visible in the town centre on foot when the businesses are open. In the last few weeks, there has been a drive to increase our presence, not only as in terms of physical presence in the town, but also so that businesses and people that will perhaps frequent or use Newcastle Town Centre know what's going on from a policing point of view, and that's through the smart alert system. So we have tried to, the PCSOs have been out and they've dropped leaflets around to get people to subscribe and sign up to the smart alert system. So, for example, if we are seeing increases in crime trends, for example, if there's an uplift in vehicle crime or antisocial behaviour, business burglaries, things like that, the smart alert system is there so that the local officer can update those people that have signed up to that system so that they know what the problems are and can perhaps maybe think about target hardening or how they can prevent being victims of crime as well, and just to try and engage with the community and that level online as well. In terms of where policing is moving into the future, which has been touched upon, Staffordshire Police is going through a really exciting time at the minute, and as of the 27th of June, we're going to be moving from a model where we've got response hubs. So at the moment, the officers that will be servicing the 999 calls are based out of Hanley. So they will be travelling over to Newcastle at the commencement of their shift and responding potentially from that location. So there's some travelling time having to be factored in. And that also does draw my neighbourhood team and the other neighbourhood teams into servicing the 999 calls, instead of focusing on some of the local priorities at times and trying to problem solve the issues. So as of the 27th of June, overall, there'll be around 70 officers that will be coming to Newcastle. That's split across 5 shifts and will give the 24-hour policing cover for the 999 response calls. It looks at around 14 to 15 PCs per response shift. The biggest impact on that we're going to see is, at the moment, the officers that are on the response teams, they will rotate around areas all north of Staffordshire. They won't just work out of Newcastle. When we go into this transformation model, the officers that we based at Newcastle will work Newcastle. So there'll be a massive uplift in terms of their local knowledge around what the problem areas are. There'll be increased ownership as well, ownership and accountability around the police officers that are working from Newcastle, because they are there to offer that 24-hour service. If there's a problem in a part of Newcastle and they've got responsibility for that area, then they will have that level of ownership where they're not going to be necessarily working in a different area of the county the following day, and they'll get to know the local problems, the local people, and the uplift in intelligence that we will be able to receive from the neighbourhood team is going to be massively increased. So that's going to be a real positive. And in terms of how that looks for the town centre, we're going to have a lot more officers that are already in Newcastle. So the ability to respond to immediate incidents of perhaps, say, public order or issues on the town is going to be hugely increased. An example perhaps that we've had recently, we've had some issues reported around St Giles Church in the town, of some of the homeless people going to the location and abusing the area for what looks like dealing and consuming illicit drugs. My team have proactively patrolled that area. We got the activity list from the church, and we've been able to base our patrol strategy around what's happening at the key times. That has resulted in some positive results in terms of moving people away from that area and also taking action proactively to stop search them. It's resulted in arrests for possession of offensive weapons, and that's resulted in charges very recently in the last week. And by us working with the local council very closely, it's highlighted issues, perhaps small things like there is a bench outside the church that draws people to that area. That bench got removed very, very quickly. Just by being able to communicate between the two of us and say, right, here's a problem, who's best and how can we best resolve that issue by, and the council took action very quickly off the back of it to remove that bench. So in terms of policing activity in the town, looking at the number of stop searches that officers do, it accounts for more than half of the stop searches across Newcastle Borough. So there is a real drive to be proactive with the problems that we have on the town centre. We're in communication with the council around how CPNWs and CPNs are processed in terms of the breach. A lot of that at the moment is being dealt with by the council. It has been raised that perhaps the police may be able to assist with handling some of those breaches, just to try and fast track some of the action that can be taken about those that are causing problems in the town centre. I think that pretty well covers, it's a bit whistle stop and much shorter than the HS2 presentation, but in terms of perhaps what I was hoping to address this evening, if there's any questions, I'll happily answer them.
Thank you, Sergeant. Just one from myself and then we'll go to members. And that is, we've heard obviously there's going to be more police presence within Castle House, essentially, and that should give a quicker response time. What about, does that mean physically more police hours on the streets of the town centre or not?
Yes, the hope would be that by having local response officers, they will already know the problems that are going on in Newcastle. They'll have accountability for the area. Because of the reduction in response time, yes, I would expect that's putting less on the neighbourhood officers who are there to service the problem-solving issues. So where we've got perhaps a problem in the town centre, it will allow them additional time to focus on those problems, be more visible in the town centre as well. So yes, I would expect that the response officers are going to be able to uplift the presence that we see in the town and also enable the neighbourhood teams to be more present as well.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you. Councillor Edgerton-Plunkett.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Steve, for coming today. It's muchly appreciated, I'm sure, by all of us to have someone from the police, to give a statement, but also to listen to our questions and our thoughts based on the town centre. The Chair sort of asked one of my questions already. Just putting my point across, I think it's really important we do get police community support officers out and present in the town centre. I believe we've got 2 security guards as well currently out in the town centre. I'm sure, and just off my thoughts, it'd be much quicker for a PCSO to radio over to a response officer to come into the town centre to deal with a situation than it would be our own security guards. And also just coming on to the safer nights, can you just confirm the timings on a Friday and Saturday night that response officers are at in the town, and also how many officers?
Yeah, so in terms of the first part of your question and response for the PCSOs to radio things through, the PCSOs will carry the PABSIS radio with them at all times as well. So if, for example, the enforcement officers do come across something whilst they're out on their patrol, they can radio that across, which goes direct to the PCSOs. And it happens on a daily basis where I see examples of incidents being radioed across the PABSIS. The PCSOs will become aware of that and start making, and they also have to pass where they are heading towards to our control room, and that will make local officers aware, myself aware, and we can make a decision around if that PCSO, that enforcement officer, is going to need additional support from other officers. So it is a very quick way that we can learn of problems on the town centre and respond to accordingly, as opposed to, for example, directing people to use the 101 system or even call the 999 system. It is very quick. Could you just repeat the second part of your question? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So it's just about the safer nights in terms of how many officers we have in the town centre and the timings that they will, highly patrol the town on a Friday and Saturday.
Okay, yeah. So in terms of when we do safer nights, there's early intervention from the PCSOs. They come on duty before the PCs on a safer nights duty. So at present, the way the model looks is that the neighbourhood team come on from 5 p.m, and they'll work through until 3 a.m. The presence on the town centre from the PCs tend to be from 10 p.m. onwards. When we move to the new model, for the first 3 to 6 months, and it's going to be reviewed within that time, the safer nights role is going to be owned by the night shift, which work a duty of 10 till 7 in the morning. And in terms of numbers that are police and safer nights at the moment, the full complement of the neighbourhood shift go on to that, which is around 6 to 7 PCs, depending on abstractions. And then at the moment, we do have a carrier that will come across from Hanley from the response team on lates, and that tends to have a similar number on one of the larger police vehicles. So generally speaking, there is 10 plus that will be on the town at Newcastle. It does vary based upon whether there are officers abstracted away with prisoners, or if there are other 999 calls that draw them off the town centre, which can happen. So the ideal is that we have those 10 officers in the town, but I suppose as incidents evolve, that can end up being quite quickly depleted. Going into the new model, the neighbourhood teams will have ownership for early intervention on the town centre. So the officers will be out in in the high vises, going into the pubs, finding out what is perhaps planned for that evening, if there's any specific events going on, engaging with the licensees, seeing how many door staff they've got on, for example, what time they're going to be open till. They'll do that early intervention from 8 p.m. through till 22:30, so 10:30. And then the response nights crew will take over from 10:30 through until we believe around 5 a.m., which Newcastle goes its nighttime economy. It's usually done by approximately 2:30 in the morning. And officers will remain on duty from the neighbourhood point of view until at least 3. Clearly, if there's still issues on the town, those officers aren't going off duty, and then I will retain them on duty until the town is cleared. We've got quite a good setup in the town centre when it comes to nighttime economy. There's 3 places that the public can pick taxis up from, and they tend to be around the key places that are closing at around 2:30 in the morning. So people are able to come out of the licensed premises and get straight into taxi and off the town centre. So we don't often have issues come kick out time on safer nights. Okay.
I'm aware, Councillor Heasom, you want to talk, but is there any committee member just before I bring Councillor Heasom in? Councillor Moffat first, and then Councillor Gorton.
Okay, thanks for your presentation. Yeah, you'll be aware, and I'm sure all of our other councillors here are aware, that there's been a lot of comment about feeling unsafe coming into the town centre, and part of our ambition for Newcastle is to make it a place where everybody feels comfortable, welcome, etc. So I'm really pleased to hear about some of the plans. So number one, I might have missed it, and I really do apologise if I have, the transformation model, which will give more of a presence in Newcastle. What's the time scale on that? So when will we actually see that shift over?
The 27th of June.
So it's the 20th, so it's
yeah.
this June. That's great.
So that is the go live date. So all officers, the response officers, will be based out of Newcastle as of that date.
Yeah, and so again, where will they be physically based? So will they have is it in Castle House or? Yeah,
so whilst
will it be like having a front desk again?
No, it's not going to be like having a front desk again. There isn't the facility, and that's not part of the plans that have been put in place from my exec team in terms of putting a front desk at Castle House. It is just going to be that there'll be per shift 15 response officers that will start their duty at 7 o'clock in the morning from Castle House, as opposed to starting their duty at 7 o'clock in the morning from Hanley, briefing and travelling over.
And do you see that they will then be kind of it will be a regular crew that local people get to know them in the town centre and all that kind of stuff? Yeah,
absolutely. This model's moving to very similar to what it was when I first joined, and I joined over at Lichfield on a response crew. So I would only work that area, and as a response PC, I would be always looking at the local briefing slide. I would very quickly start to learn who the problem persons are, where the problem areas are, where I need to be at what particular times. At the moment, those response officers based at Hanley, rotates between, for example, Newcastle, Hanley, the Moorlands. So they're having to look at different briefing slides on a rotating basis. So by having these officers come and be stationed outside of a local NIC, that's going to be a local station, I should say.
Right.
That's going to be massively advantageous for the local community.
Yeah, that's great, because one of the things we constantly hear is that we'd like to see a return to traditional policing, where we all know those faces and building relationships. That also means building relationships with people who may have difficult stories and may be causing issues, because that's when you can get them to be engaged with other agencies. The other question, and I do apologise if you're not the person to be able to answer this, because I know you're town centre, but again, I can't sit in a meeting with the police present and not ask this question. Again, it's coming from the community. There's an awful lot of constant comment about the fact that if it's Wally's Quarry or if it's HS2, the police seem to be there in huge numbers, but when we need somebody in the town centre, we can never find somebody. What kind of reassurance can you give in terms of that kind of relationship building with communities? And like I say, if you're not the person to ask, then I do apologise, but it is something that I'm being asked to ask as a councillor.
No, of course, I think I possibly can answer it. If I can't, I apologise, and I'll take away anything that I can't. In terms of Wally's Quarry, that was becoming incredibly resource intensive for Staffordshire Police, and particularly for the local policing team, the neighbourhood teams. When there would be a protest reported to us, there would have to be my shift would turn out to that. Because of the frequency of it happening and the number of officers that were needed to attend to ensure that that there weren't ongoing public order issues and that people didn't come to harm, because you've got two conflicting parties there, and the potential for issues is quite high. So it is resource intensive. So the decision was made that it would become a force issue, a force response, and that put a command structure in place. So it is overseen by an assistant chief constable, and then there is a who would be the gold commander. I think it's assistant chief constable Bibby, and there is then a command structure that would fall through the ranks, that if there is a protest and it becomes a disruptive protest, central resources are pulled together and taken to Wally's Quarry. And what that would do is relieve some of the pressure on the local neighbourhood team to carry on with what they need to do as part of their day-to-day business.
Yeah, thank you for that. It was just, it is that constant thing where we say, if we want a police officer in the town centre, we can never find one, but there is always plenty somewhere else. But I think you've addressed that, and I'm really looking forward to see what happens on the 27th of June onwards. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moffat. Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I think you said a lot about the new model for policing for the town centre, which I found very, very encouraging. There is just one detail that I wanted to check, and apologies if I got this wrong. Did you say in your presentation that the new model would be reviewed after 3 to 6 months? If that timescale is wrong, do you know when the sort of timescale for the review will take place?
No, sorry. So the model is kicking in. The 3 to 6 months was very specifically around how safer nights in Newcastle would be policed. So at the moment, it's handled by what we would refer to as like a late shift, who would work from 5 till 3 in the morning. The 3 to 6 month pilot is for the night shift to cover the safer nights duty. The reasoning behind that is some licensed premises may be run until, if they run till, for example, 3 o'clock in the morning, the late shift cannot go off at 3 o'clock in the morning. They would invariably be always kept on beyond that duty time. So by having the night shift take on the safer nights, they are in the town from an early point in the evening. They have a good understanding of what some of the issues in that town on that particular night are going to be as they go through that duty. And then come the point where some of the licensed premises are kicking people out, the night crew are not under that pressure where they're already at the end of their shift, they're already tired, and they can see it through all the way to the morning if necessary.
then, in terms of the overall model for policing in the town centre, are there any plans for it to review it after a period of operation?
In terms of general policing of the town centre, I mean, we always keep it under review in terms of what the local problems are at the time. So where we've had a local issue reported recently around St Giles Church, the patrol strategy has changed in relation to how we police the town centre to focus on that area a little bit more so. That's managed at a very sort of local level. I think does that answer your question? Sorry.
I think I'm trying to make, and I'm sorry if I'm not getting it across, is that the model that you've outlined seems to me to have tremendous strengths and tremendous benefits. I'm just wondering that obviously during the course of its progress, will the police authority, want to look at its operation with a view to making changes, or is this model going to be applied and you will work it?
So we're probably talking about decisions at a slightly higher level than perhaps myself in terms of the forces operating model. The message that I've received is that when this model comes in and we're having local response teams at local stations, because this is a change across the whole of Staffordshire, that model is going to come in, and that is going to be the working model for Staffordshire Police for the foreseeable. The reason this change has come in, we have had a change in leadership with Chief Constable Chris Noble joining Staffordshire, and from that appointment is where we've had this new model proposed and implemented.
Thank you. Two last questions and then we will finish. I think Councillor Sweeney first and then Councillor Heaton.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chairman, again. Yeah, thanks for everything you said tonight. The biggest sort of issue that we have on the town at the moment is the rough sitting element, which I'm sure you're aware of. You call them vagrants, don't you? Which is not an expression I've heard for a long time, but it's the same people. And when your new Chief Inspector joins, I really feel this is something that has to be the number one focus in the town centre, because it is just so off-putting to people. They come in, they see these people asleep, off their heads on whatever they're on, staggering around, shouting and swearing, drinking, and it just looks absolutely awful. And I really feel that whatever we can do as a council and yourselves can do as a police, working together to try to stop this, would be time very well spent. Thank you.
Yeah, just to sort of respond to that. So at the moment, town centre antisocial behaviour, vagrancy, it's currently featuring as a local priority, and we tend to only pick 3 local priorities maximum. The incoming Chief Inspector has already been briefed around that as part of a supervisors meeting. It is a difficult issue for policing in that it's not a criminal offence to be homeless. Where there are issues around those homeless persons causing such issues as swearing in the street, antisocial behaviour, drug taking, that's where some of the tools in our toolbox around stop search become really key. If we get that information that they are drug dealing or in possession of controlled substances, we can take positive action around that at that point. We make sure that we're engaging with them all, that we know who they all are, so we can feed that back into the partners as well. And we do try to work with the council in terms of diverting them away from rough sleeping.
Councillor Heaton.
Thank you, Chair. Going on from what Councillor Sweeney said, I think there is an element of what we call rough sitters. The majority of them aren't homeless. They come in to make money one way or another. And it's very difficult to deal with those if people aren't prepared to make complaints. Are the police actually going out to the businesses now? Because a lot of businesses will grumble about it, but they won't actually make a complaint. And it makes it very, very difficult to change the PSPOs to enable the police to have the powers to do something about it. I mean, at the moment, there's one where there's no alcohol on the town, and certainly a lot of them are sitting there with alcohol. And I know for a fact, from what one of the marshals was saying, that one of the newsagents in town is selling them individual packs of beer, which isn't within their licence. So they can be moved on, and I appreciate it's difficult. You've got to catch them when they're at it, drinking on the town. And of course, because it's a regular element, they're quite aware of how long it takes the police to get there. So by the time the police get there, the alcohol's disappeared. And I appreciate it's a difficult situation, but is there anything that you can, or any light you can shed on that to see what we can do? And particularly with the rough sitters, they sit down castle walks and other parts of the town, particularly on market days. And it is off-putting for a lot of people who feel, even if they're not physically saying, like, I want money, for how they're presenting, it is basically asking for money, and they don't seem to be able to be being moved on. And I'm not sure why that is.
Yes, and if whilst on patrol we're faced with a rough sitter and they're sitting on the street, and if they're not begging, and if they're not causing any issue or breaching any conditions within the PSPO, or within any CPNW or CPN that they've got in place, as the police were in a very difficult position in terms of what powers we have to move that person on, based upon them potentially being an eyesore and not very nice for the community to see. It is a very difficult situation for us. We can't go up to them and say, I don't like the fact that you're sitting there looking like that. Can you move on, please?
If it's a regular occurrence, though, is there nothing that it can be done about that, and educating shopkeepers and premise owners, because people don't want to go into their shops when people are actually sitting outside wrapped up in a duvet with a cap on or whatever else, or a dog or whatever, and they're coming out, the ones that are giving them money, the ones that maybe might feel that they can't walk past because they feel they should be giving them money. And even though they're not physically asking them for it, they're presenting in such a way that people do feel obliged to give them something. Mm-hmm. Now, there must be something we can do about that, and particularly educating premise holders. If they don't put the complaints in, I mean, the PSPOs are under review shortly. They're not really going to change that much if people aren't complaining about it in the proper manner.
Yes, I know of an instance where we've had an off license that's been serving high strength alcohol to some of the homeless in the town. That has been picked up by a local officer and was raised within the council, where there has been a meeting held around, right, how can we a review of their license potentially in terms of what alcohol they can sell in what quantities. If, for example, it means instead of them being allowed to sell single cans, they have to maybe sell packs of 4, just to make it a little bit less difficult for perhaps persons on very low to no income to obtain, just to try and prevent the access to those sorts of amenities that they seek in Newcastle.
There is a very good team in Newcastle that do work with the officers, and they work with the homeless. They go out quite early in the morning so they can identify exactly who our homeless are. Mm-hmm. But we do have quite an element that come in, particularly on market days, that aren't homeless at all. And we also have an element that, particularly in the summer, are quite an antisocial element. So it is, I welcome the change in the policing strategy later in the month, and I hope it does have an impact. The marshals are quite proactive with the police, so I hope that continues. But I will say this, and it may be that members are aware. I've had it. I don't know if anybody else has. Has anybody else had the link to the police survey that says, are you getting what you need from your police service? Do you feel safe? Because if not, maybe we could get Sarah Finn to send that out to all the members, maybe put it on the Facebook page, because it closes next weekend. So we could do with people actually filling that out, so that if they have got any concerns, they can make them known.
I think that's a good suggestion, Councillor Heason. I see a lot of members nodding. So if we ask our officers to facilitate that as soon as possible, please. And thank you for your comments. We need to bring this to a close now because we've got 2 more substantive items. So thank you, Sergeant, for coming along this evening and answering our questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to another substantive item now, which is item 7, which is the Borough Local Plan, which is on pages 9 to 89 of your printed pack and 11 to 90 of your YouGov pack. And this is going to be introduced by Cabinet Member Councillor Fear.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So very important item, reports in front of us. I draw members' attention to particularly 1.6 and section 5 of the report to show why it's important. I also think it's important to think about section 1.9, showing us that what this exercise was about was awareness raising, information gathering. It certainly wasn't about carving words on stone or anything like that. And the system itself of consultation is described at length in section 2 of the report. And you can see there that the consultation went on, I think I totted this up right on the train, for 14 weeks, best part of 3 months anyway. We had use of what one might call now traditional forms of communication, what I suppose we could call quasi-traditional forms of communication, just the straight internet, and social media was in use at that time as well. Also, I think worth pointing out is that there were 10 face-to-face events in this consultation. And that was done, of course, at the very difficult time with the Omicron variant bouncing around. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our officers for making those possible. And I would hope that I could associate the committee with those thanks on that particular point. Just as a way of contrast, the analogous exercise next door in the city, the statutory amount of time for consultation is 6 weeks. The city stuck to 6 weeks. We had this longer period. In the same way, my understanding is, and I'm sure I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, that the city only had virtual engagement with the population, where we had this series of face-to-face meetings. And again, nicely listed for you, so you can see some here in the centre of the borough, but also pepper potted around the borough as well. But those things having been said, what I'd like to do, Mr. Chairman, is hand over to our officer, Gemma, who's much wiser in these ways than I am, to take you through the report in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Councillor Fear. Gemma, can we just check technology? Can you hear me? Yes, we can. Okay. That's fine. Are you making any presentation with share screen or just verbalising?
No, just verbalising, and I'll keep it quick because I know those other items did take a while to get through. Basically, we set out in January 2021 to do a plan for the borough. So this is the first consultation for that plan, the local plan. There will be 2 more public consultations in due course. So the plan evolves in response to people's comments, and particularly statutory consultees, infrastructure providers, for example, that will give us evidence and information to help inform the direction of the plan. The point of the local plan is it sets local planning policies, and it eventually will also set site allocations, so sites for development, and those will be shown in subsequent versions. But the point of this version really was to set out what are the key issues facing the borough in terms of planning and development, and what are potential options, the routes that we could go down, depending on the selection of, targets for housing and employment, and big decisions that need to be made through the local plan. So the consultation took place, as Councillor Fear noted, for 14 weeks between the 1st of November and the 24th of January this year. So 1st of November last year to 24th of January this year. And the report in front of you details exactly how the consultation was carried out, including a number of face-to-face events, some virtual events, and direct notifications to people on our consultation database, and advertised in various ways. We received quite a relatively high response for an issues and options paper. So there were 3,649 individual comments. So someone may have made 40 comments. So I think there was 37 questions in the document. So if they made one on each one plus submitted extra material, it all gets counted. There was also 2 petitions and a template letter that was sent, which also we've treated as a petition. And the key sort of themes that were coming out of the consultation was the sort of demand to utilise brownfield sites wherever possible to protect greenbelt land. There was lots of discussion on infrastructure and how this would impact on communities, and climate change became a theme. Brexit and COVID were also touched on, and alignment with neighbourhood plans. But as you'll see from the report, there's quite a detailed quantitative and a qualitative report which shows sort of common themes and what came up. It's impossible to summarise all of those thousands of comments, but they are published and publicly available on the consultation portal. These comments will help to shape the plan as it evolves, and we ask that the committee notes this and any further comments for Cabinet, if they could let us know. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Gemma, for summarising what is a substantive document. Obviously, the members have had a chance to pre-read this, so I'll open it up for questions. Councillor Moffat.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gemma, and again, to everybody who's put the report together. It's a massive undertaking, but there are a couple of points that I'd like to raise, and it may be that these can be added in and taken to Cabinet. So first of all, on point 1.7, you talk in the report about a key element of the preparation is the approach to consulting and engaging with the community. And the final line of that is, in undertaking consultation, the council must comply with its adopted statement of community involvement. So there's a couple of things which I think need to be reflected in the report here. Was a difficulty that lots of people had online. Sometimes the system itself was breaking down. When people tried to go back on, they'd lost information that they'd already put in. So there were some glitches on that. I personally had quite a lot of local people contacting me, and I did email officers about it. So I think somewhere we need to recognise and acknowledge that with such a big undertaking, sometimes the online process has been difficult. The other thing was, and it was brilliant that in those circumstances that there were some face-to-face meetings held, and I think that's amazing, particularly when we compare with our neighbours. So that's a massive, huge undertaking, and which I know community members were really grateful for. But I am aware that people were expecting at those face-to-face meetings that comments that they made at those meetings would be gathered. And I think that in our own community involvement statement, that it was said that they would be able to make comment at those meetings, and I know that that didn't happen. So again, there are two other consultation processes which you have spoken about. So these are things that we really need to address going forward. You did comment about the 757 identical letters, template letters. Individuals went through, they didn't just sign a petition, they went through a process of collecting those letters wherever they were, actually putting their names and addresses, etc. on there. And I'd like to question, and I'm really not an expert here, but seeing as those 757 came from my ward, and I've had a lot of people comment back to me. Some people posted their letters in because they weren't allowed to email them. Some people brought letters in directly to Castle House. To treat them as as something other than letters, I'm just questioning what the legality of that is. And whether or not we need to count those letters separately. That's a question that I feel the need to put. And one final one, on 8.1, we talk about the budget being met, etc. Now, I am aware, and I think everybody was extremely grateful to the officers for extending the amount of time that the consultation process went on. But I'm assuming that the budget was originally set for the length of time of the original consultation period, which was not the 12 weeks referred to. So just to have some confirmation of that budget, that our consultation process being within budget, and if so, how did we manage to stretch the original budget to fit the extended period of time? It might not be that all of those answers can be given now, but I would like something addressed within the report. So the difficulty with our online process, with it crashing, etc., and that will be addressed. The statement of community involvement. Are we compliant with our own statement in that on the face-to-face meetings, there wasn't an opportunity for people's feedback to be captured at that point? The identical letters, is it legal to just treat them like it's a petition? Because people went through not just signing a petition at a shop, but actually collecting letters and posting them, etc. And finally, the budget. Just confirmation that through extending the process that we were still able to deliver it within budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moffat. There's quite a few questions there. Gemma, I hope you've written some of them down.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Go from last to first. So about the budget being met. In terms of extending the consultation, we only held, I think it was one further virtual event and 2 physical events, which would have been the cost to hire of the hall. In advertisements, mainly we notified using email our contact database. There would have been some letters, which would have been a small cost. But in terms of cost to extend the length of time, I mean, I haven't got a figure, but it would be minimal. It would have been within the realms of what would be an existing consultation budget, I would feel. There wasn't anything that I think is an exorbitant cost as a result of, it's more of a time delay. That's more of the issue than the cost, in my opinion, is the longer you have consultations, the longer it takes to do the plan in terms of your timetable. On your point on sort of, is it legal to be treated as a petition? I'm definitely not a lawyer and not going to answer that. But what I would say is, I was just summarising in terms of, trying to get the presentation over quickly with what we had received. That does not mean that the weight that could be given to the strength of feeling that came from your community came across very clearly, both from, in fact, all both petitions and the letter referenced the issues around growth in Audley, but the letter also had more detail and more points in it that were related to other questions in the local plan as well. Us as planners will take it all into account, but what we realise is there's a bigger strength of feeling in that area that came across through the consultation. More people decided to raise their voices about it, and that doesn't mean that it's going to be dismissed like, oh, that's just one representation. That's not going to happen. So from a legal point of view, I can't answer, but from a planning point of view of how we will take it into account is understanding the strength of feeling from that community. In terms of the compliance with the statement of community involvement, what happened there, the only error, or not error, but the only sort of anomaly was the statement of community involvement says that in the venues we'll have some sort of note paper for you to make a physical note if you want to and leave it. One of the reasons we didn't do that was, well, the COVID issue made it very difficult to do anything that you handed out or let people touch. But the main reason was because there were 37 questions in the document. So I wasn't quite sure whether to set out a leaflet with all 37, with all of them written down. And I did think that people would be overfaced by that they might put them off saying their comments. Now, what we did do is anybody that came in that brought anything in, we took it away as a representation, we logged it and we took their details and that it was officially recorded. So anybody that brought in anything to us, or it doesn't matter if it was on a piece of paper or what it was on, we did take away. So they did have that opportunity and they weren't told, no, go away, put it online, or no, go away and post it. So I would say that we complied with the SCI in its essence on that regard. And the last one was about sort of consulting. So I just need to reread this and remember what we were saying. The report should reflect the difficulty that we had online. I mean, I'm not sure how to edit the report, but I would agree that there was some teething problems because we had brought in a new software provider to do a consultation portal. We also did find that a lot of people made sort of technical errors on their side, that perhaps, you know, for example, when they're logging in and not confirming an email using their email address, the kind of things that you might do on any kind of portal, to be honest, nowadays, you know, you click through to link to confirm your email address, perhaps you hadn't put the right one in. But what we did do was every time anyone had a problem, we instantly responded it. We had our full team on the planning policy inbox, we had them all on the phones, and we didn't have anybody that was left at the end saying we didn't manage to make our representation because of your consultation portal. You know, failing all of the options, they did just submit an email and we did register it anyway. So there was nobody that was turned away that said their representation wasn't valid in that regard. So I hope that's addressed some of your questions.
Yeah, thank you.
So, thank you, Gemma. I just want to come back on the one point that you weren't able to answer, which was the legality question. And is there anybody in the room who is able to answer that, or do we need to take that offline to come back with an answer?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Can I just clarify what the question is actually getting at? What is the point made? What's the question around legality in terms of treating representations like a petition? I'm not sure I'm with you.
Okay, so in the report, it says that the 757 letters were treated as a petition. So there have been members of my community who have contacted me and said, but I signed a petition about such and such. I wrote a letter and I posted it in, or I took it in. Is it legal to treat my letter as if it was just a comment on a petition? So I'm asking that question. Actually, Gemma has reassured us in a certain way, in that actually for the purpose of the report, what she was saying is that all of the comments have been taken seriously and the weight of those comments have not been minimised by it being treated as a petition. But it was a direct question that was asked of me with members of the public who had looked at the report and have asked me to ask that question, is it legal? So
yeah, that's helpful. Thank you for that clarification. I mean, the law isn't as prescriptive as to say, you know, you shall in a local plan consultation process treat this type of response like this and that type of response like that. So I think, you know, the answer that Gemma gave you covers off the legal points as well. It's all in terms of the fairness and the reasonableness of the process and the principles of natural justice, the opportunity to make comments, the fact that the comments have been properly considered and taken on board. So in terms of logistics, sometimes if you get 750 sample letters, you wouldn't address each and one of those in a detailed consultation response, because that might change a 50-page document into a 500-page document. But so long as you are demonstrating that you are taking on board the content of the letter, and you are addressing your mind to a certain extent to the amount of people who have sent that in or made that representation, then that will suffice in terms of meeting those principles of natural justice. You know, it's very much you know, the strength of the point that is important. The number of people who make it and the strength of feeling is, of course, a consideration, but it's whether you know the point is a good point or not, I think, is the primary consideration. I hope that's helpful, Chair.
Councillor Moffat, are you content with the answer?
yeah, and I think the fact that this is being recorded, it means that members of the public who have got concern have heard us answer that question as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dickinson. Other questions from members? Councillor Gorton.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can I begin really by congratulating officers, I think, for conducting this exercise during a very difficult time, and I think the results are extremely impressive. What I've got, and apologies if this is a sort of naive question, but I'm looking at the recommendation at the start of the report, and it says Scrutiny Committee notes feedback, fine. Then it goes on to say, and following review, provides comments for further consideration at Cabinet. Now, I'm a bit confused about what actually that means. And I'm sort of looking to yourself and maybe Councillor Fear for some guidance on that. I've come along to this meeting with about 3 pages of notes of my responses to many of the issues raised by the consultation. I have to say, some of the feedback surprised me. Some of the feedback I agreed with, and some of the feedback I was frankly a bit puzzled by. And I suppose my question is this evening really about the process? Or are we going to have an opportunity as a scrutiny committee to get more involved with some of the excellent suggestions that have come forward from residents? One of the things I'd highlight really is around some of the views on the town centre, which were not what I was expecting to read at all. I thought that they were much more progressive, much more forward thinking, and can I use this sort of expression, almost radical. As I say, what I'm really looking for is some sort of guidance of how we as members of the scrutiny committee can, well, if you don't mind me using the expression, sort of cherry pick those themes, those views that we feel should really do merit consideration by Cabinet for possible inclusion in the plan. Because I'm sure what you don't want is for me to sit here for about an hour going through my notes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Yes, in some ways, I suppose this document does the 2 things that the council has identified. So one is to look at, and I think previous speakers talked about this, the process of consultation. And in that respect, I hope some of the worries have been dealt with. I too share frustration about IT. I have to use it at work, and I've written quite detailed things from time to time, which have then just collapsed. What I could say is, A, we are working hard to make sure IT improves all the time. There's always room for improvement, of course. In frustration, at the end of the day, there is always the old-fashioned remedy of pen and pencil. I've learned through bitter experience always to write documents I put on a computer as a separate file, so that if I input them and the input goes wrong, it's still sitting there. And if worst comes to worst, I can hit the printer button and I can produce it and send it along. Otherwise, I think what we got to remember is that we do have 2 separate sets of consultations. So the documents will come back, I believe, to this committee for a look at as well. If people want to underline things, as I say, there is an assurance that everything in the report will be debated at the Cabinet meeting, which takes us to the next part of this. If people want to underline things at this juncture, I think that's absolutely fine. But I'm very grateful for the councillor saying that, what we don't want now is to be here till midnight, which would not be so good. I also like to reassure him that radical is a fine word. There are radicals on my side of the political divide as well as his.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Gordon? Thank you. Any other members wishing to speak? No? Okay, so we've got the purpose of the report. The recommendation is the Scrutiny Committee notes the feedback on the Newcastle under Lyme local plan issues and strategic options consultation. And following review provides comments for further consideration of Cabinet, which has just obviously been enhanced. We're all happy to move that. Thank you. So that takes us on to the last substantive item now, which is our future high street funds and town deal for Kidsgrove and Newcastle under Lyme. This is a regular update, and Simon McKenney will take us through that.
I can just introduce it.
Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, thank you very much. What re-elected members might feel when they see this presentation is they've seen half this stuff before, which a lot of them will have done. The reason we put it on is, of course, there's new members on this committee. So we try to sort of encapsulate things so they know what's going on as well, really. So I apologise for that, but that is the reason for it. So I think it's a fair reason. I could tell you all about it now, but I think Simon's actually got a presentation. If I start dipping into bits of it, it'll mess his presentation up. So I'll pass over to you, please, Simon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. And to those of you that haven't met before, I'm Simon McKenney. I'm the Exec Director for Development and Growth, who are overlooking the Town Deal and Future High Street funds on behalf of the council. I'll go through this very quickly because it is 5 to 9 and then it is getting a bit hot. Let's try and see if we can get through this quite quickly. But for the new guys that are in the room, just to give you a little bit of an update, we've got 2 sets of funding that are now beginning to be classed as part of our levelling up funding, but they originally came through as Future High Street funding, which was to deal with issues in the town centre. And then we had 2 extra pots of money that came through the Town Deal monies, one for Newcastle and one for Kidsgrove. Total around about 50 million in total. Future High Street we had to bid for, and Town Deal we were awarded. So in January 21, we were offered just over 11 million by the government for the Future High Street funds, which was around how do we address what's happening in the town centres of lots of vacant shop units, high streets not being used as they used to, reinventing them, etc., etc. So it's about delivering change on the high street and driving different uses in those areas where they have been traditionally retail. It was predominantly centred around the Rycroft, which is the old civic building. Now, I don't know where you parked this evening, but if you were on the old Sainsbury's site car park, you'll have seen that there's a building missing, which was the old civic building, which will be is in the final throes of its demolition. They're filling in the basement at the moment, and that'll be handed over as a complete site for us at the end of this month. And the idea is that we will have a mixed-use development on that site. Now, this is a map that shows what we are hoping, aiming to deliver on that site. So if you see at the bottom, we've got the Aspire headquarters. They've confirmed that they're looking to take a portion of the site from us for a new headquarters building and a 90-unit over 55 development, not a supported living facility, but for downsizers and older people over 55 who wish to live in a town centre. So we're working with Aspire around how that actual land deal will work. They will deliver that themselves. Over on the left, next to Liverpool Road, which is next to the Justice Courts, we've awarded a contract for a design and build of a new multi-storey car park, because that factors in later, because one of our aspirations through the Town Deal is to demolish the Midway car park and create a development site in the town centre, again to regenerate the town, but also the Midway car park is at the end of its economic life and needs an awful lot of money spending on it. So we're working with that, hopefully to start that later this year. And in the middle site, we are in early stages of looking at feasibility of putting a mid-range hotel on that site. So we've spoken to the industry. They think that Newcastle is ripe for a mid-range 3-star business hotel, not with a conference centre or with a leisure centre, because we're not at the 4 or 5-star end of the market for Newcastle just yet, but it's a good start. There are plenty of budget hotels that service the town and the area, but a mid-range is possible. So we're working through business cases around how that might work, because they're not cheap to put on the ground. This is what the civic building looked like a couple of days ago before they started filling in the large holes. So you can see that site is now ready for Aspire to start working up their measurements and designs, etc. Now that building has disappeared. We have also purchased a semi-redundant shopping centre in the middle of the town, York Place, which is very busy on the high street side of it, but on the other sides and internally, it's predominantly vacant. It's not as vacant as the Roebuck, but we managed to acquire this building in late February, early March, and we've now appointed Will Dixon to look at some redevelopment options of what those might be, and to try and reimagine that space in the town centre. Still early designs and ideas around that, and again, it'll be very much driven by affordability and the commercial aspect of it. This is what you can see. This is a very early image that we put out to the press around what we thought the Rycroft and the connection to the high street would be. So we're trying to make Rycroft a new centre in the town, but we're trying to connect it to the high street. And there's a couple of barriers in the way. So we're going to try and work through those to see whether we can get some connectivity between the new site, where predominant amount of investment is going, and into the town centre itself. This is just an infographic that we've also released previously. So you can see the Guildhall. If I've got my mouse here, you can see the Guildhall here. This is where we've got York Place. This is the Aspire building and the car park. But what it doesn't show down here on the High Street is we're trying to reimagine some of that space down at the bottom of the High Street where it seems empty and sparse. And we were looking at how we might do some interesting landscaping and public realm works down there to try and create more dwell time and a more pleasant environment for the users of the street at that end of town. That's the future High Street. If I quickly, it's 1 minute to 9, rushing on, don't worry, we'll get there. Kidsgrove Town Deal was the first town deal that we submitted through to government. We had to, we were told how much money we could bid for. It was up to 25 million. And this was the red line that we decided that would incorporate within the Kidsgrove Town Deal. We were awarded just under 17 million for 5 projects. First one of being which was put through the system. First one for the government and first one for us was Kidsgrove Sports Centre, which was awarded in April last year. And that scheme has been on the ground and will be handed over to us on the 27th of June. So that's our first town deal scheme delivered. Chatterley Valley, which I'll come on to, is an industrial zone, part of an enterprise zone, the North Staffordshire Enterprise Zone. Railway works and canal enhancements, and something called a shared hub where we want to try and get services into the centre of Kidsgrove and deliver directly on a local level. So Chatterley Valley is a very exciting opportunity for us. It's the North Staffordshire Enterprise Zone. It's the last of several sites across the area that were to be unlocked. There were a few feasibility issues, so we were able to unlock the scheme by providing town deal funds to pay for abnormal costs. So that work is starting on site this month. So they'll be working on a new entrance to the site, roundabout, and some relocation of some utilities. But Harworth, who own the site, will be looking to level the site for the platforms that they will then build industrial units off. But we're very excited that this is going to become an advanced ceramic campus. So a company called Lucidian, who are currently over in Hanley, have been relocating out to this is a picture of the entire site. You can see where the roundabout is at the top. This bit here is Lucidian, and then these are two very large blocks of units that they're thinking about. This is Lucidian's working document at the moment. So it's a main building, their main headquarters will transfer, but they're also working with the industry and government about creating an advanced ceramic research building and a testing centre. So it becomes a real centre for excellence in the country for this type of technology. Some of you who were on the committee last year will have heard me say that some of the stuff that they make with ceramics is actually on the rover that's on the moon and on Mars. So I don't know how they do that with ceramics, but it sounds very impressive. So we're really excited because that's going to be, the site will create nearly 1,800 highly skilled jobs, which is a good thing for Newcastle rather than some of the lower grade jobs that we've had before. Kidsgrove Station is a new real development of the Kidsgrove Station building itself, and joining up with the work that Network Rail are doing on the car park. And because of the links to HS2, because Kidsgrove into Crewe is just one stop, and Crewe is going to be a stop for HS2. So we've managed to unlock the redevelopment of that station, which was being held up by finance problems. Canal enhancements to improve access to and from the canal in Kidsgrove and to enhance the usability of that facility. That's again been approved by government, so that work will be starting this side of Christmas, hopefully. And then the last project is working up a shared service hub, in the town centre. So we have, if we've got down here is a station down on the bottom left. What we're trying to do, this is our preferred site here, which is a car park that we own, to try and look at creating a shared hub with council services, town council services, DWP, health, etc., etc. So there's a one-stop shop for that type of activity in the town. And the idea is to create some sort of connectivity between the town centre and the railway, which is lacking at the moment. If you're in Kidsgrove, you could blink and miss the fact that there is a railway station in the town. because it's hidden its way out at the back, etc. So what we're trying to do is enhance that approach to the station through public realm improvements and by drawing people into that area of town with new services and facilities. And the sports centre, as I said, that is, I don't know whether anybody remembers going to the Kidsgrove Sports Centre, but that is the pool that we've now filled in. It used to have a massive 3-4 metre diving end. We filled that in, and that's all now been properly surfaced and filled with water and tested, etc. The building itself looks like something that you'd see in a David Lloyd. Is it David Lloyd? I don't go to gyms. David Lloyd gym thing. It's all very modern and it looks great. And, you know, we spent 7.5 million and we've really stretched that pound to try and make that facility the best we can. And the community group that we're taking over from us or take possession from us on the 27th are hoping to open the 3rd or 4th week of July. And they're really excited by the facilities that they'll be able to offer. And I've got a large waiting list of people that really want to participate in that facility that was well loved before it was closed, unfortunately. The Newcastle town deal is around the town centre of Newcastle. It's south of where the Kidsgrove was, goes as far out as Keele and Westbury Park, and then up to the A500. We got, hold on a minute, have I got the... No, I haven't got the amount here, sorry. We got just over 23 million, sorry, for this town deal, and we got that awarded late last year. So again, there are various themes that we're looking at, predominantly around trying to kickstart some problems and some master plans and some strategies that we had in the bag, but had no funding for. So the likes of Nutton Master Plan, Cross Street, Chesterton, etc. These are adding money into the feasibility. So they are now viable projects we can deliver against the strategies and aspirations that were delivered, that were envisaged previously. We've also got walking and cycling network. We want to try and create a centre for performing arts, which is based around circus skills, which is in association with the New Vic and local historians and circus associated skills, etc. And there is a circus training company that's relocating up from London, I think, to join this particular amalgamation of locals who are very excited about this. But it's about celebrating our history with the Philip Astley and the modern circus ring, etc. So, and that's got people in government quite excited because it's something very different, but it will bring a niche element into the town, but it will also create a training and skills facility, not just for circus skills, but also for young disaffected people or groups who, need confidence building, etc., where you can do some skills at these centres and really come out of your shell and, spend a week and then put on a show, and you'll feel, you get a much more self-worth out, a well-being out of it type of thing. Smart infrastructure, again, every modern town centre needs very fast gigabit internet connection. If we want to attract new businesses, with in the high growth areas, so in finance or in the visual arts or anything like that, we need to have the infrastructure to be able for those people to connect out across the world. So we were looking at that type of putting that infrastructure in and around the town, and we're working with Keele University to try and create a teaching and learning facility, which is a digital society, which will work with new businesses to try and upskill people how to use digital technology, etc., going forward. EV charging points, again, very important for our green agenda. We've got some money for putting electric vehicle charging points across the town and into new facilities. So, for example, the new car park on the Rycroft site will have EV charging points as standard. And just very quickly, just to show that we are, we are delivering against this. We had a 1.5 million of advanced town deal, which we had to spend within about 7 months. We spent that, and we spent all of it. We've spent 40% of our future high street fund, and almost 35% has been either spent or committed on the Kidsgrove town deal. We are in the process of submitting our business cases for Newcastle by the end of this month. So by Christmas, we'll have heard whether we successfully convinced government that our projects are deliverable. But what this shows is that we are showing government that once we get money, we are spending it regardless of our lack of resource, because we're a small council. We've not delivered a change program of over 50 million in a 3-4 year period before. And it's this type of belief that we need to give to government that we are spending this money in the right way means that when they come forward with more money, they're confident that we will deliver it. And that's the only reason government give it to you, because they want you to show that you can spend it. Any questions? I got to 9:10. Sorry, Chair.
You did very well, Simon. Lots of very important information in there and a good update. So over to members. Any questions or comments, please? You see, you enthralled them, Simon. Absolutely.
I think I bored them.
Not at all. Councillor Panther?
Just a quick one. I like the layout of the proposed deal for Rycroft, but could you remind us what is going to go in place of the old multi-storey car park? I've forgotten.
Yeah, the Midway car park. Well, once we've built a new car park, we'll look to close the new Midway car park. And what we're thinking about, that there will be the problem we've got in the town is we've got this concrete ring road around it and you can't see into the town. And part of this agenda and creating vistas into the town from that road, we want to try and create a permeable or permeability through that site. Now that might be that we take it down to a certain level and build up in a couple of towers, for example. Whether they be residential or office or leisure, we're not entirely sure. There is an awful lot of residential going into the town from private investment. So when we were looking at these plans originally, we were looking at predominantly residential, but the market might well have dealt with that issue. And what we don't want to do is oversupply. So we're constantly reviewing what we need to do. So the ideas for Midway are, at the moment, it needs to be demolished. What goes back is still very much will be driven by what the market requires, because we have to act in a commercial way on that particular site as well.
Thank you. Any other members wish to speak? No? Okay, well, thank you, Simon. That's an excellent update for a very exciting set of plans that we have, and we'll continue to receive updates at this meeting from you. So that now moves us on to item 9, which is the work programme. Our next meeting is in September. If you would like any items to be considered for inclusion on the meeting, please email me with those items and they'll be considered in the next prep meeting. And public question time, item 10. There is no questions put by the public officially, so we can move on to item 11, urgent business, which again, there was none put forward. So I'd like to thank members for their forbearance tonight. We are closing the meeting at 12 minutes past 9. Good evening, everyone. Date of the next meeting, Clark, do you know? I hope so, because I've just shut my laptop down.